Coming up, meet the entrepreneurs who are taking Australia into the final frontier. Plus, we'll hear an elevator pitch from a young visionary who's sending robots into space to do man's dirty work. Entrepreneurs starts now.
This is Entrepreneurs.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs, where we talk directly to the founders of Australian businesses, from startups and small business owners to the icons of industry. This week it is World Space Week. It's also the 60th anniversary of NASA, and it's 10 years since Elon Musk's SpaceX launched their first mission. What better setting to launch into the theme of space entrepreneurs? We have a fantastic panel of experts to explore this fast-growing market and discuss where the opportunities are for Australia. We'll be catching up with space advocate and aeronautics engineer Ord Vignel, and later on we'll be hearing from the founder of High Earth Orbit Robotics, William Crowe. Firstly, we're going to kick off with Dr. Jason Held, founder of Sabre Astronautics. He also started the Space Engineering Lab at the University of Sydney, the Delta V Space Accelerator, and the Vostok Space Beer Project. So, Jason, let's start with the size of the opportunity. What is the global size of the space, mate? We'll get to the beer in a second. That's where I'm ultimately going. The size of the opportunity around space, and particularly for Australian businesses.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned the beer, because you wouldn't expect beer to be a kind of a space sort of thing. But looking at the top down, space is a $420 billion business worldwide. And that market is looking to triple in the next 10 years. So it's not just that it's a big market, but it's looking to triple. So that's the opportunity worldwide. And so the question is, Australia, can we play in this market? So, yeah, Sabre Astronautics, we do space operations, satellite control software, and we're playing in this, and we're looking at a whole bunch of other companies like ours that are growing from absolutely nothing. We're talking people out of the garage in their underpants and coming up with new things and getting it out into the market. It's exciting.
I'm fascinated by your career, your PhD, everything you've done. What got you into space in the first place?
Oh, look, since I saw Star Wars when I was 5. That's the
right. It was Star Wars. Of course, it was Star Wars.
Exactly the same.
Of course.
Yeah, and my mother was a failed science fiction writer. She had all the classics, and so space is something I always wanted to do, and just as an adult, I got to it a little bit later in life. So,
Sabre Astronautics, talk to us about what you do there and the key focus areas.
Well, Sabre does space operations software and satellite control. So we kind of sit in between people who have customers and problems that they have on the ground, agriculture, mining, things like that, and people who actually have and own satellites and produce data. And we control the satellites, we keep them alive, we work with satellite dishes to do the communications, and we make sure that the people on the ground get their data.
One of the interesting things he said to me is we make space travel into a video game for the people on the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, normally, I mean, space is one of those industries that up until a few years ago was really quite static, hasn't changed very much. It's still very much like you can imagine, we've seen Apollo 13, you know, Tom Hanks says, Houston, we have a problem, and then the camera pans over to a room full of 30 people sitting in front of these massive screens and trying to fit cup holders into toilet paper rolls. That's the solution to your problem. Well, we decided, it's the 21st century, let's do it in a 21st century way, so we turned space operations into a video game, put machine learning on the back end so you could diagnose the health of a satellite, and making space easy enough for your kids to use. So this is kind of like Space Command in a box. That's what it is.
Now, I have to ask, space beer. What is it? How does it apply?
This was, look, I mean, it's a funny story, but at the time, when we first found it in 2000, we actually first found it in 2008 in the United States while I was living in Manly Beach. And the US company found it, and 6 weeks later the GFC happened and the company failed. So we restarted it here in Australia, and one of the first projects I did, I wanted to have like a fun, real mass market kind of a play. All right, so how do you have space and be really mass market? Like beer is a STEM program for adults. We've had beer since before we had writing. It took us, I don't know, 2,000 years to sober up enough to invent the wheel after that. But space tourism was also happening at the same time, so I thought it would be a good go. Walked into the Four Pines Brewery and talked to the general manager. I said, hey, how'd you like to have your beer in space? And he kind of looked at me like, what? That's how it happened.
And from that, here we are.
And here we are.
Right, right. Ord, you've seen the evolution of the global space market across 25 years now, starting with the European Space Agency over a couple of decades ago. What have been some of the most profound shifts that you've seen in the space market throughout your career?
Two main shifts for me, time and money. It's always about time and money.
Right.
Space mission used to be funded entirely by government in the past decades. And I think now more and more we see space mission being funded by private investment. So that's the old space where I come from to new space. So that's opening a lot of opportunities. The time as well, it used to take more than 10 years to launch a mission into space. Today with the revolution of technology, you have components that are available off the shelves. You can launch a satellite within 2 years if you have a good idea of what you want to do. So from 10 years to 2 years. And the cost involved in doing all this has decreased as well dramatically. And I think space is becoming more and more accessible, and that's a big change. And it's good news for entrepreneurs and good news for students as well who wants to play in that field.
And I imagine it would be, right? Because there must be, you know, more possibilities becoming more real every day because of the acceleration of change and progress, more funding, less time. That seems like an exponential growth curve.
Exactly right, exactly right.
How do you think Australia's performing in the overall space market? Opportunities, challenges, how are we doing?
So I think Australia is performing very well and has been performing very well for a long time. We forget, but in Woomera we used to launch and test rockets on a regular basis. The predecessor of Ariane, the European launcher, was tested here in the late 60s, early 70s. We also provided communication services for the Apollo moon landing. We've launched a couple of Australian satellites. They are still up there. We have an extensive network of ground stations, both for astronomy, for communication, for deep space communication. And we have 90 space startups now. Last time I counted it was 80, now it's 90 of the one we know of. For a population of 23 million people, we are doing very, very well. And last but not least, we finally have our own space agency since the 1st of July. And I think this is going to unlock our potential and it's going to advertise the space capabilities that we have in this country and the space skills that we have in this country on a world scale. And that's really exciting times, and that's just the beginning.
It is exciting times. I mean, I was interested in space before, but talking to you guys, I'm getting more excited by the minute. Jason, you draw an interesting delineation between people who are building the freeway to space or helping people drive on that freeway.
Right.
What's the distinction there?
Using the road are people who need space data, need space products for their day-to-day life. We actually use space in our day-to-day lives. GPS, navigation, banking, and the finance sector certainly uses it. The mining sector uses imagery from space to look for damage in their mines and save human life. Firefighting, of course, being in New South Wales, we're talking about a drought, so there's a critical need for space data to monitor crops, and the farmers need it. So it's a enabler for a wide range of industries. Of course, we all complain if our Uber is 10 meters away, you know, so we need to have more accurate GPS. So, you know, I don't know if it's a critical need, but it's certainly a need that we want. You know, and that's using the road. And building the road is the satellite manufacturers themselves, right? And that's the difference. These are two different ways you could actually start a business in Australia with two different strategies and two different types of risks.
Ord, a question I'm really interested in asking you is, as a female involved in the space area, I know this is something that's close to your heart, how do we encourage more girls and women to enter this area?
That's a very good question. I think the first thing we need to do is demystify what engineering is about, what space is about. It's not an exclusive club. Engineering is about problem solving, and women are as good as anyone else to solve problems, maybe better. Space is not only about engineering. Yeah, you can be a doctor in space. We need biologists. We need ergonomists. I think space careers embrace a large spectrum of different skills and careers. There is something for everyone, so there is something for every woman.
Absolutely.
And there is nothing more exciting and fun and inspiring than working in space, as far as I'm concerned.
I am beginning to agree with you. Coming up after the break, we discuss the Elon Musk versus Jeff Bezos space race.
You're watching Entrepreneurs. Welcome back to Entrepreneurs.
Welcome back to Entrepreneurs. We are on a space odyssey with Dr. Jason Held and Aude Vignal. Let's talk myths and some of the myths we need to bust around space as a business opportunity. Aude, I might start with you.
Yeah, well, I think first thing, demystify the space as an exclusive club. I think there is something to do there for everyone. Being more and more accessible as well, because of costs going down and the time shortened. And again, with all the infrastructure we have in space already and all the application we can drive from the data, there is still a lot of things to be invented there and to be tried out. So, you know, you may talk better than me about this, Jason, but I think when you're an entrepreneur and want to do stuff, being in space or somewhere else, the same principle apply.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah, look, I mean, in the last segment, you talked about breaking down anybody can be in space, and that's really true, and it's getting even more true as time goes on, because you're looking at Moore's Law for space, the miniaturization of spacecraft. It used to be spacecraft would be 1.5 billion is this big, and now it's about the size of a toaster, and you could get involved, and the cost is less than half the cost of a juice bar franchise, so it's bootstrappable. You're talking about democratization of space, so anybody can. In fact, some of the entrepreneurs in Australia had never done space in their lives, and they're killing it. They're getting investment to the tune of 19, 20 million, and it's just because they have common sense, they work hard, and I think that really does fit with the Australian culture. This is a really good match.
The other progression that's been really exciting in the space industry is it used to be the moon race and now it's the Mars race, which often, you know, obviously gives rise to the Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, you know, friendly competition that we're seeing there. What do you guys make of what both, you know, SpaceX and Bezos are doing in that space?
For me, what these guys are doing is giving us a vision of doing something big.
Yes.
It's been a long time since we haven't dreamt big like that, so that's very good. I'm also convinced, I mean, I don't know them personally and they have different style, but it's in the human evolution naturally to have, you know, mastered the ground, mastered the sea, mastered the air. Next is space, and evolution is we are curious, we want to go and see what's out there. And they are both going there different ways, different plan. I think Elon has proven quite a lot of things.
Sure. So I mean, that's the thing. Like Elon sent SpaceX sent his Tesla up to orbit. And it's really motivating. You know, I get passionate looking at this thing. But what's really interesting is he sent it all the way out past Mars orbit. So he proved to the world that you could send something to Mars as a private business, and that's important because remember, this is a business discussion, not just a space discussion. Both of these companies have customers and revenue. That's their obligation. While governments, they have to respond to votes and to politics. So we haven't had a trip to the moon in a long time. Now that there's actual money involved with people for business, now that's a big change.
Jason, how do you distinguish between what Elon's doing and what you know, Jeff Bezos is doing? Because they're both sort of playing in different territory. Right. As far as we can see, at least.
Right. No, it's because they both have rockets that launch and land like that. Right. That's it. There's your technical description of what their rockets are doing.
I'm glad we got the rocket scientist in tonight.
But here's the thing, right? Because it's landing into the same rocket, that rocket's reusable. Both of them have that same strategy. It's brilliant. You have to do it to reduce the cost of launch. That's why we haven't done this in a long time. The difference between the two is both there's a strategic style. So Elon Musk, he likes to launch his rocket and publicize his failures, so he could be perfectly open to the community, and so people can see where the failures are and gain credibility in his business and gain improvement. While Jeff Bezos holds all his cards to his chest, and then once he has a complete success, he sends it out. So very different styles, and I think Elon's going for larger payloads with people. Blue Origin. It looks like they're not trying to go as high, but then again, you can never really tell. It's a very different style of company.
Or 20 seconds or less. Why does Bezos say this is the most important work of his life?
That's a good question. I think that's something close to his heart. I think he's passionate about space. I heard this style of interviewing his executive members, and the first question he asks is, why are you interested in space? And if you answer that question correctly, then you go to the next stage. So I think the guy is genuinely passionate about space and wants to play something there. But both of these guys are disruptors, and I think that's a very important thing to say. The space business has not changed for a long time.
Yes.
With these guys arriving on the field, there is disruption, and disruption is always very good. So yeah, vision, disruption, very good stuff.
Huge progress.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Stick around. Up next, we have the elevator pitch from up-and-coming space entrepreneur and founder of High Earth Orbit Robotics, William Crowe.
You're watching Entrepreneurs. Welcome back to Entrepreneurs.
And now it's time for the elevator pitch with space entrepreneur William Crowe. In this segment, we introduce an early stage startup to our guest panel. Will gets 1 minute to tell the panel about his business, and then the panel will provide him with some feedback and discussion on his business and on the pitch. Will, welcome to the panel. You've got 1 minute and your time starts now.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here. So what happened in Indonesia last year is that 17,000 ATMs just stopped operating. And it meant that life was disrupted for many people in that country. And the reason for that is a little more obscure. A satellite about 37,000 kilometers above our heads just exploded. And no one really understands why. And we're here to help solve that problem. So what we do, we build little satellites about yay big, about the size of a shoebox, and we design them for use in high Earth orbit. So they can get really close to these larger satellites, providing services like ATM communications. And we give them a health checkup, preferably before they explode, to help operators understand how their satellites are going. And when we're not doing that, we're doing what we call space situational awareness. So we take a bit of a broader view, and we just check up what's going on around, make sure there's no debris nearby, make sure no one's doing any movements that are maybe malicious. And that's it.
That's it.
Fantastic. Well done, Will. That was very succinct. Thank you very much. Or Jason, any comments, questions?
You want to start? Go start.
To start.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about space situational awareness. I managed to say it properly. Yeah. There is a lot of satellites in orbit around the Earth. There is more and more debris, so I think you're onto something that really need to be looked at. What I fail to understand is what is your product exactly, because there is already a lot of data that are available. The issue is to aggregate them and present them so that we can make sure our satellites are safe. What is the differentiator that you bring, and what is the product exactly that you sell?
Wow, I'm so glad you asked that, Aude. Really appreciate it. And you know, you have a French background, and Emmanuel Macron just came out and said that he's really unhappy with how some operators are acting in space, and he needs more space situational awareness. We've had a lot of customers from France approach us after that. Yeah, so our differentiation is that we can get extremely close to these larger satellites. So most people at the moment, they look at space situational awareness from Earth, and there are a few satellites that are closer to what we call geosynchronous orbit, about 37,000 kilometers away, but they're usually military satellites. So there's not this civilian data that we need to give people a better idea of how their satellites are operating, and get a closer look at this debris, what it looks like exactly, and what is the state of these satellites exactly as well.
Okay, so what you're selling is you're selling data. All right, so your customers are whom? It's the satellite owners, right? Not the people on the ground, they're the beneficiaries. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. It's
right.
a satellite owner.
Great,
yeah.
great. So you got a customer who's got a satellite, and the satellite gets hit by debris and dust, and that dust causes a lot of it. Totally true. Totally true. And it costs millions of dollars in lost revenue. It's a great example. So talk to us about the volume of that market. How many customers do you think there are in orbit today that would spend money on what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. And this has been a huge issue for us, is really finding out how large that market is. So what we do know is that there's over 440 satellites in geostationary orbit, and we think they're all potential customers. And what we've tested with some customers is what price they'd be willing to pay for an inspection, and we're seeing about the $1 million mark is right for a small service such as ours. And what we can do, we can act as the scout kind of mission, so we go up, have a check when something does go wrong, and that allows operators to make a decision: do we get a large satellite servicing spacecraft in to really help us? And those deals are worth a lot more.
I'm just going to wrap you up there. Will, this sounds like an incredibly exciting opportunity, and almost like you're at the cusp of the market opportunity that you're addressing, which is no doubt going to grow, particularly relative to the growth of the entire space industry, right? So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Ord, this was a really good discussion. We should do more shows on space in the future. I also want to say a huge thank you to our executive producer, Fleur Brown, as well as Startup Oz, the national advocacy body for startups. That's Entrepreneurs for this week. Next week, we will be exploring the topic of kidpreneurs. We chat to visionaries who started their businesses and ventures at a very young age. You can watch us anytime on 9 Now, Foxtel Go, and on the catch-up section of yourmoney.com.au. I'm Jack Delosa. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.